Hi, I'm Pat Kiernan. Thanks for joining us for Pat's Papers, a look at what's in the nation's newspapers, a summary of some of the most relevant, the most interesting stories. Let's begin here in New York. So would you turn down tickets to the Super Bowl? Okay, probably not the Super Bowl, but the question highlights an interesting dilemma for sports leagues, as described on the front page of the New York Times. The heart of this story is the fact that the big screen, high-definition television experience is so good now at home that many fans think the best seat in the house isn't at the stadium. The story says sports officials are rethinking the game experience. The idea is to bring the living room to the game rather than the other way around. Next to that story, the lighter side of President Obama. Times writer Cheryl Gay Stolberg looks at the changing style at the White House. A couple of examples here. First, Mr. Obama likes the temperature set higher, so the former rule about always wearing a suit jacket in the Oval Office has been relaxed. And the new president tends to wonder if he needs to talk to somebody, he's just as likely to walk down the hall to find them than to have them summoned to the Oval Office. The big national story, the House vote in favor of the economic stimulus package, $819 billion worth of tax cuts and spending. Here's a paragraph from the Times story. It says the two-year package is among the biggest in history, reflecting a broad view in Congress that urgent fiscal help is needed for an economy in crisis, at a time when the Federal Reserve has already cut interest rates almost to zero. The Washington Post with three stories on this topic on its front page. The main story highlights the voting along party lines. It says Mr. Obama's personal salesmanship effort failed to secure a single Republican supporter. The bill contains a controversial trade provision. The infrastructure projects included are mostly banned from using foreign steel. Some in business and overseas say that can be interpreted as a declaration of war against free trade. That sort of war already seems to have been declared in the cheese business. The Post reporting today that one of the last acts of the Bush administration was to put a 300% duty on Roquefort cheese, part of a tit-for-tat trade battle over a European ban on any U.S. beef that contains hormones. On the front page of the San Francisco Chronicle, radio host Rush Limbaugh said yesterday, it seems the new president's afraid of him. Mr. Obama told congressional Republicans yesterday, you can't just listen to Rush Limbaugh and get things done. Now Limbaugh has latched onto that statement. Chronicle writer Joe Garofoli looks at the influence of Limbaugh in the GOP. It is a heightened influence in a party with a leadership vacuum. Pictures of snow dominate the front pages in Kentucky and Arkansas today. 1.3 million Americans shivered through last night in homes without electricity, most of them in these two states. Ice storms swept across the Midwest and South. Kentucky and Arkansas have been granted federal assistance. The storms moved out to sea now, only after taking 23 lives. The Miami Herald with a story that should give some comfort to would-be kidney donors. Researchers at the University of Minnesota found those who gave up one of their two kidneys live a normal lifespan and don't have a higher risk of kidney failure later in life. The world has its first openly gay prime minister, Iceland's Joanna Sigurdardóttir. The San Francisco Chronicle story says the 66-year-old former union organizer is considered by some in Iceland to be too far to the political left. To Illinois, Governor Rod Blagojevich in his impeachment trial, which continues. The Tribune's coverage says the Senate heard the undercover phone recordings for the first time. These tapes that supposedly show the governor wanted to sell a seat in the Senate. The story says the tapes cut both ways, with some Illinois state senators now more determined than ever to remove the governor, others believing the recordings are ambiguous. Across town, the Chicago Sun-Times leads with word that Blagojevich is backtracking after calling his impeachment trial a kangaroo court and saying he wouldn't participate. He has now asked to make his own closing argument. There's a story out of Bay City, Michigan, picked up by many papers today, among them the Philadelphia Inquirer. A 93-year-old World War II veteran froze to death there. Because of some unpaid power bills, the city had put a power limiter on his house, and he froze after the power cut out. Neighbors say the elderly man rarely left his home. He probably didn't even realize he had this power problem. The city has suspended the use of these power limiters until it can review its enforcement practices for unpaid bills. The Boston Herald carries a story today about fashionable hip flasks. They're decorated with gemstones and star-shaped charms. There's a sticker on the flask that reads, "Not intended for minors," but an official with Mothers Against Drunk Driving doesn't buy it and says it seems to promote underage drinking. A change for the Washington Post is reported in its own pages. The Book World section of the paper is being eliminated. Book reviews are still going to be published, but they will be mixed in with the rest of the paper rather than having their own standalone weekly section. The New York Times story on this says publishers are partly to blame for the Post decision. They tend not to advertise as much in newspapers as they used to, instead spending their marketing budgets on agreements with bookstores that ensure prominent display space. In the Thursday Style section of the New York Times, there's a new wave of bedding products that claim to have beauty benefits, like bedding that contains copper, which is supposed to fight wrinkles while you sleep. Finally, just about every paper I saw had coverage of the request from the Postmaster General to lawmakers to get a break from the current requirement. Right now, the law says mail has to be delivered 6 days a week. The New York Post uses Seinfeld's mailman Newman to illustrate its story about the possible cutback to 5-day-a-week delivery. There's a twist over on the right side of the page. On the postman's oath, it says snow and rain may not stand in the way of the mail, but it appears the economic crisis can. And those are just some of the headlines this morning. Thanks for joining us for Pat's Papers. Go to patspapers.com, scroll down on the main page, and you will see links to the individual newspapers where these stories were published. You can read them for yourself there and read more from any one of those newspapers.